Right, everybody. I think we nearly have everybody on the line. We'll do one more minute to allow people to join and transfer from their last Zoom call to this Zoom call. And then
so this is the last call on a Zoom marathon.
Exactly. Well, this particular Zoom marathon, anyway. All right, I have 3:33, so we might kick off. Welcome, everybody. Kia ora koutou. I see some familiar faces, some names and faces that have been on other ERP workshops we've been running today and Friday as well. So welcome back. Thank you for taking the time to join. For those who I don't know, my name is Kate Wilson-Butler. I'm the Head of Climate Action at SBC. These are very busy times, and as we've just been discussing, straitened times in Auckland in particular, so we do really appreciate you prioritising these engagements. As those who've joined the other workshops will know and have heard me say multiple times already, this is one of a series of sector-on thematic workshops we're hosting for SBC and CLC members to help shape our collective response to the ERP discussion document and to inform our next and final draft that we'll issue next week for any final comment ahead of the deadline, which is 24th of November, so just over 2 weeks away. As we've also had confirmed in the last few days, there will not be a consultation process on the actual draft emissions reduction plan. So this is it, our chance to be clear on what we as a collective think is needed to close the emission gap in the document, because there is a bit of a gap between the emissions budgets the Commission has recommended and what is needed to achieve those. And so this is really it, this is our chance. So how we'll work today, as very similar to the other workshops, it'll be pretty simple. I'll give a short opening. I'll pass over to Toby and possibly Jeff as well to, oh, that's his transport section. Obviously, they won't be doing an overview of the transport section. It will be the energy and industry section of our draft response as circulated last week. Then we'll open it up for discussion for about half an hour before closing out. So, as I've said in the other workshops, while there is time earmarked specifically for the discussion, this is your session, and we would encourage you, if you have questions or comments on the way, to use the raise hand function to enable that conversation. So absolutely, please feel free to chip in if you have thoughts or questions. Our early comment on the discussion document when it first came out was clear that we were a bit disappointed that this was not a draft plan. We had in earnest expected to see at this point a draft emissions reduction plan. Obviously that's not what we have before us. We have a discussion document, and a discussion document that doesn't quite contain the policies and measures that are needed to achieve the emissions budgets the Commission recommended, as I mentioned before. So by and large, our approach with this response is really around how we can help close that gap. What are the concrete ideas and projects that we can put forward to help drive our transition and drive down our emissions? So in energy and industry is certainly one sector that we're looking at very, very closely for possible savings. We have quite a bit to build on the basis of the work that we did for the Climate Change Commission. And many of you will have attended the workshop that we did last Thursday with the Business Energy Council and MB. So that workshop was a chance to traverse the full range of issues on the energy and industry part of the ERP discussion document and hear from officials as well. This hour, or just under an hour that we have now, we see as complementary, a chance to build off the base of that knowledge and explore what sort of input and headline recommendations SBC and CLC can shape together to drive down emissions in the sector and help bridge that gap that I've identified. So I'll now pass over to Toby to talk us through the initial draft we circulated last week. Toby, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Kate, and hi everyone. This is very much a double act. This is Jeff and me. Some of you will have seen this presentation before, but obviously not before not since the discussion with MB last week. So what's important is for this part of the submit, or all parts of the submission, is that we try and narrow ideas to clear, tangible ideas, quantifiable ideas for reducing emissions. That's the first challenge. But you can't really do that without some reference to, and the government needs to do this or that, but focus on the clarity and the definition. And secondly, our recommendations should be on top of what has been articulated by the consultation document so far. that's actually relatively easy because there's not been a lot of quantification in the energy and industry space in the documentation. So they're the two places we want to go. I have a little, I have a couple of slides that we used before, and I'm going to get them up again. I've got several slide packs open. Hopefully I get the right one. Let's see, can you see that slide? Yep. It says Energy and Industry questions 58 to 69.
Yep.
So I haven't put up the questions. We can deal with the questions. What's important for this group is that we step through 4 or 5 sections and see what the current state of our headline recommendations are. So, and there's obviously some carryovers for some of these into building and construction and transport. Starting with process heat, I'm not going to steal any Jeff's thunder. Jeff's going to talk about the recommendations as they are and appeal to you for any further direction or quantification or ambition that we can inject into process heat over and above what's written on the page. Jeff.
Hello. Hi, everybody. I'm Jeff. So the two key points we have here are based on initial feedback. Number 2 is easy, which is really around no more fossil fuel consuming heat plants for process heat. And that's something that's been consistent in previous submissions to the Climate Change Commission and others as part of the Climate Leaders Coalition advice. The other one, I guess, is around GIDI. And so for those of you who don't know what GIDI is a fund called the Government Investment in Decarbonising Industry. It's been administered by ECA. And there was 3 rounds of funding. The second round was awarded about a month ago, and the final round is currently in for consultation of 3. What we found, though, I guess from a bigger picture, is that it's been really good for sort of projects and businesses of a certain scale. It hasn't really helped the big end of town who need more help than perhaps what GIDI can help and fund. And it certainly hasn't helped the smaller end who probably don't qualify for some of those projects. So I think it's been good that that the scheme has been there as a bit of a trial and has got some things moving, but we think there needs to be, I guess, a couple of things. It needs to be a wider scheme with perhaps a little more, an easier way in for some smaller users. And at the big end of town, we think there has to be some direct engagement from government, because that's where we think there's going to be a really tangible difference in emissions. And I guess what I'm thinking here is in the next sort of 4-year window. Coming back to the reason, part of the reason we're here is the ERP is 7.5 million tonnes short over that initial carbon budget. So we see this as one of those areas where they could accelerate pretty quickly if they had the right level of engagement with the right industries. Toby.
No, we need to ask the audience if they think that's a good idea or a bad idea, or if there are other ideas should be on the list under process heat.
So I guess just one, if I just touch on GIDI for a moment, we're focused on GIDI being, I guess, government's arms into industry. There is also another significant fund of $300 million where the government is investing in itself, which is the State Sector Decarbonisation Fund. So they have this amount that they're trying to do their little bit around DHBs and schools and what have you, which is cool. But this GIDI is geared around business as a whole. I guess that's the reason for the focus on it at this stage.
Well, just while we're waiting for someone in the audience to ask a question about this, so the coal aspect of this interests me, Jeff. This coal's used in a lot of things other than process heat. So, for example, it's used in a whole lot of schools, used in a whole lot of hospitals. Should SBC be recommending that all uses of coal be switched? Because some of these process heat issues, particularly the high heat issues, they still need some sort of need some sort of heating and some timing. Is there a scope here for SBC to say just about coal, stop it in schools and hospitals?
I think so. I think it's going to be a little harder for existing facilities that are burning coal to switch away. And part of that is related to the actually, converting the plant away to burn something else. But part of it is the supply chain and getting the new fuel there in the amounts that we might like to provide there. So that kind of links to the bioeconomy piece, which is something else that we're that CLC are looking to roll forward as part of the submission, is around how can we be confident that there's going to be enough alternative fuels, be they biofuels, biomass, or even electricity, those right fuels in the right areas at the right time at the right price point.
Okay. So the last two slides are hydrogen and bioeconomy, by the way.
Okay. So what I would say is one thing that we have seen, and others may have as well, is that it's like a school, for example, doesn't need to have a hot water or steam running around to generate the level of heat that it needs to provide what it needs to provide, which is comfortable place for students. So it might be more of a discussion around, is that the right place to be converting from coal to, say, biomass? And if you're putting wood there, then maybe you're better off not putting wood there and using the wood in the areas that are going to be much harder technically or economically to convert to alternative fuels. And that could be a role that we take, where we could be a little more prescriptive of where we think some of those fuels could go.
I'm just going to pause for a moment and ask if there's anyone wants to comment on process heat or fuel types.
So Kathleen's just in through a bit of information around the number of schools and what they're burning.
Okay.
And I'm in the weeds here as well, so pull me out of the weeds if you need to. But a project we're involved with right now is looking at all of the boiler plant across New Zealand. We've finished the South Island piece, and we know how many school boilers there are and what they're burning, and the numbers are, again, more than 100 coal boilers in the South Island alone, so it's quite significant, but they're quite small, so smaller than, say, one dairy plant.
Chief, I'm wondering whether it might be helpful, I think that's an important point, it'll be interesting to square that against what's being pursued through the public sector decarbonisation programme. I wondered whether it might be worth unpacking headline recommendation 1 slightly, because I think 2 is pretty self-explanatory, right? That's quite black and white. I think that there's there's probably 3 different limbs to the first one. And I wondered whether you might talk a little bit more about, for members who might not have the chance to delve into the detail of the narrative and the submission, about some of your thinking around what that solution for the larger users might look like, as well as your thinking around this piece around de-risking the long-term fuel costs for those users for whom capital outlay is not their primary concern.
Sure, more than happy to do that. So let's talk about the big users first. At the moment, if we talk about how government engages with industry, and again, I don't know who's on the line necessarily, but there may be some people in the room who have got an engagement with ECA, and ECA are the ones who come and talk and try and help, I guess, that conversation with industry to help decarbonise, link some of the funding mechanisms they have with projects that could help to reduce emissions. Look, that's all well and good, and I guess ECA have enough levers to help with the human resource piece, so they can help get consultants to come and help, or they can help find graduates to come and support, and they can help with that stuff pretty well. They haven't got a huge amount on the capital side, and I'm not entirely sure that ECA's funding is linked closely enough with the level of carbon, I'm going to call it carbon risk, but really our carbon obligation going forward, which is going to be linked to the carbon price, which is reasonably significant. And so I guess as a country, what I'm thinking of is we are a long way short of that first budget. For me, the easiest things to go and have a look at would be the bigger process heat emitters. And so when I talk about having a bespoke solution for the large users, I'm thinking about how can the government work in with the likes of the large dairy, large meat, other large manufacturers who use lots of process heat, to help them bring forward their investments, which are, I mean, people are talking about these investments occurring in the next 10 years. How can the government help it get done in the next 3 or 4 years, so that we can count some of those savings within our initial first emissions budget. And I guess there's two ways they could do that. Look, they can throw lots of money at a capital project, which again will be a number, or I think they can give some real certainty and sort of underwrite what those renewable fuel energy costs might look like. When we had the discussion last week, there was a person who was from a process heat business at the session, and he spoke about the challenge that they had was not around the capital side, they can find that, but they are worried that the price of electricity and the price of biomass is going to continue to escalate, and they will struggle to make that business case work. Whereas if the government can underwrite that and say, look, we'll guarantee a price point of X for 20 years or 10 years or whatever that might look like, that's going to help give those industries and those businesses confidence that they can make the conversion and actually make that business case work themselves.
Brilliant. Mark Yates.
Thanks, Toby and Jeff. It's a very interesting discussion. And you're obviously factoring in the price of carbon, which is a continually escalating price. From an electricity perspective, I know there's a lot of work being done at looking at controlling the price of electricity because it is already out of hand at the moment. So I think there's probably more certainty in stable electricity pricing compared to a price on carbon, which we know is just going to keep going exponential. The other thing is, in your equations, are you factoring in the additional savings? For instance, the trucks that go to the school with coal and the trains that go to the school with coal, the cost of those, not only from a carbon point of view, but the transport costs, the costs on the damaged roads, the congestion costs, are those additional costs being factored into your equations?
So those costs, I guess, in the carbon world are called well to tank, and they are considered in terms of the overall carbon footprint. And answer your question around are they doing it for schools and what have you, I don't know if the government's taking that into account. Your other point about the electricity sector, what I was thinking as well is if I just go back to my point around that fixed price logic. I think with electricity it can be quite easy to do that, or easier to do that, but I'm thinking more along the lines of biomass and wood, where there isn't really that much low cost wood around. There's been an expectation in the market that you can buy lots of forestry slash and the crap that they leave on skid sites in the middle of the forest, but that's just not coming to fruition. We're going to be at a point, if everyone converts to biomass, where we're chipping pulp logs that would otherwise be exported across to China for production, and the price point of that is going to get to it's going to be a floated international price really quickly. So I think that's the price certainty I'm thinking of. I think electricity-wise, the government can intervene, and as you've mentioned, Mark, they're doing that. But I'm thinking about other fuels. How can they keep that consistent across across the market, so we're not necessarily backing a horse?
Yeah, and I totally agree with what you're saying. And it's, do we say here's the low hanging fruit with the likes of the schools and small industries that can use immediately electricity? Putting in heat pumps is just a no-brainer for schools. Whacking in a whole lot of solar is also a no-brainer for schools. So what is the low-hanging fruit? Because you're quite right, the high process heat is the real challenge. And maybe hydrogen, I think you mentioned, Toby, that you're going to be talking about hydrogen. Hydrogen could be an answer there because it burns hotter than coal.
But talking pricing again, hydrogen is, if we want to go down that path and give business confidence in hydrogen, then we have to have a really clear strategy that we're going to have enough hydrogen at a certain price point for them to decarbonise. So I agree with what you're saying, Mark.
Yeah.
That is a very good segue into the next point, which is incorrectly labelled electricity generation, and just all look away while I edit live. There you go, that's better. The Climate Change Commission recommended the adoption of, recommended the development of an all energy strategy and the adoption of a renewable energy target. So first of all, let's talk about that, and then we'll talk about electricity. The all energy strategy would take into account the way Jeff's talking. You say one thing, you talk about biomass, you talk about coal, then you talk about electricity, then you talk about hydrogen. And so these are different stages of development, different stages of coordination, different stages of transition, and there are different pressures on them. We know from the heavy freight work that in the end, the hard to abate heavy freight is either going to have to be electricity or biomass or hydrogen or something else. And in the absence of knowing what something else is, it's got to be some combination of the three. So what's economic? How do you think about them? How do you make sure that you develop them and don't pick winners? It's the same with the pan industry strategy. And sadly, MB's not really going to get into that until 2020 next year. And I think the first exercise they're going to go through is agree the process for developing an energy strategy. So that's progress, but it's about taking account of all of the energy sources simultaneously. And we come back to that on the next slide. The second limb of this is that if you go for a 50% renewable energy target, it takes away the need to go for a 100% renewable electricity. The idea being that all energy sources and energy management would be seen across the whole energy sector, and if it made sense for electricity generation to go 100%, so be it, and if it made sense for it to not do the last percent, well, so be it. So we have some questions for you. Do you agree with there being a pan energy strategy? Do you agree that the target should be 50% of all energy consumed? Do you agree that the target of 100% renewable electricity should be aspirational? Now, I would say of those, 50% of all energy would be a huge advance on where we are today, and maybe it should be lower and maybe it should be higher, but I think locking in a renewable energy target would be an advance, and it's something that would be very easy for SBC CLC to get in behind. 100% renewable electricity becoming aspirational is far more controversial, and I will draw a breath and say, does anyone want to comment on those three limbs? Pan energy strategy, a renewable energy target, and the renewable electricity target being aspirational.
Can I add a supplementary question, Toby, just on the energy strategy point? I know the Aotearoa Circle has been running a process to develop an energy strategy, and a few of our members have been involved with that. And I understand MB officials have also been part of that discussion as well. So my question for those members who have been engaged with that would be, how do you see that process and the product it results in relating to MB's work on the energy strategy? Is it your hope that what is produced from the Aotearoa Circle process is able to be picked up and essentially become the government's energy strategy? Is it likely to produce something along those lines? So any insights on that process, to which we're obviously not party, would be most welcome too.
Yeah, I can talk to that a little bit, Kate. It's Robin here from Vector. So I think that the Aotearoa Circle work, it's, yeah, to your point, it's had involvement from MB. I think it's a really critical and invaluable sort of proactive consultation. It represents voices across the whole industry. And just to your question, Toby, about a pan energy strategy, I think it's critical that the energy strategy is pan energy, that we're thinking about a number of different fuels, gas and electricity together, recognising the interdependencies between those different fuels, recognising the potential of new green renewable fuels. And I think the Aotearoa Circle work, I think it's a really invaluable input in that it brings all these different voices of the sector together. But I think, as Toby recognised, the the process of the National Energy Strategy is to be kicked off from next year. So it would be unusual if a product that was developed in 2021 was the strategy.
Thank you, Robin.
Yes, thank you, Robin. I agree with with everything that you said. I suppose the natural question for me is then, what role does that work from the Aotearoa Circle play and what the government does? And perhaps it's just an input and informs the direction of travel for the government's work.
Well, I'd say that it's a critical input to inform that direction of travel.
Great.
Do you guys think it's going quickly enough? Like, when are we going to get? And the reason I ask that is, again, we've talked about GIDI in that last round, and GIDI's all around people moving away from fuel A to fuel B. Whereas if we might find, once we get the strategy moving, that hydrogen or biogas was the right horse to back, but by that stage we've had that many people move away from it that it's no longer economical viable.
I think you raise a good point, Jeff, and a sort of message that we have, and this is in terms of the emissions reduction plan, sort of more related to the building section, but it's really important that any policy decisions that are made around gas and the signals that they send to the industry about whether to invest or not, that follows a gas transition plan. So, and that includes thinking about, what decisions and what signals are going to encourage the emergence of these new markets and new green gases. So I think, does that make sense? I'd say at the moment it's about making sure that the wrong signal isn't being sent to enable those future fuels to develop.
Robin, I'm going to give you a sneak preview of the next slide because it's relevant to this discussion. So the next slide shows recommendations that recommend regulators remove any barriers to investments that would facilitate emissions reductions. So it's about emissions reductions. And that emission reduction objectives are national economy-wide objectives as expressed in the Act. So the issue here is you've got something that's regulated to kingdom come on the one hand, so gas and electricity. You've got coal, which is not, don't know how well regulated that is. Then you've got green hydrogen, other hydrogen perhaps, but green hydrogen, biomass, and potentially other energy sources. And they really, they have varied levels of maturity and development, and they have mismatched levels of governance. And so one of the things about a pan-energy strategy is that there would also have to be some joined up thinking across the regulatory regimes in each silo. So that remove regulatory barriers or create joined up thinking, it could be, is the part of that previous point about the pan-industry strategy. And just before I draw breath, Robin, the specific issue of electricity regulation is a separate recommendation again, and that is in the next slide. So back to here, this is the idea of both having this slide that's on the screen. This is the idea of having a pan-industry strategy, but also thinking about the regulatory mechanisms and institutional arrangements around them all. And this is what Jeff's saying. Well, you don't want people to get out ahead of one thing and miss out on another thing. And that sort of certainty would be useful. I will draw breath there.
Yeah, thanks, Toby. I mean, we would completely agree with what you just said about a need to take a sort of a holistic whole systems approach in the way that we're thinking about regulation and policy. And yeah, I take your point that you're looking at electricity market regulation in a separate slide, but it's really about sort of looking across and through our whole supply chain, to unlock new efficiencies that we can look to. But thinking about the energy system more widely, that whole systems approach is also thinking about different value streams and different forms of green fuels, renewable green fuels. And something that I've picked up from engagement with MB through that Aotearoa Circle process is seems to be, in terms of this national energy strategy, a real strategic focus on fuel diversity. and the importance of fuel diversity and energy security. So I think that's an important sort of strand to come in as well. But yeah, I'd absolutely support what you just said, Toby. That's great.
I'm happy to give everyone a sneak preview of that other slide so you can see that point for those of you who don't, who aren't involved in this on a day-to-day basis. Electricity regulation evolved in a world where electricity was produced by large sets far away and transmitted and distributed to consumers, and was famously divided up into regulation around the economic regulation around the monopolies, distribution and transmission, and a contestable wholesale market and contestable retailing for the energy limb. This regulatory regime in electricity is not really going to cut the mustard in both where we're going in terms of transformation driven by technology, but also the transformation that's going to be driven by mass electrification. And so this point here goes to looking at the barriers of electricity regulation and getting that straightened out so specifically electricity can evolve. Prageeth's on the line here in this call. He may want to comment on that. But anyway, the other three slides: the energy strategy and making electricity 100% renewable aspirational, having a holistic look at the energy sector from regulatory and institutional mechanisms, and electricity specifically, unlocking the barrier that is the current suite of regulatory mechanisms in electricity specifically. And I will draw breath there and invite any comments on those three.
Yeah, I'll jump in. Also a name call as well. No, Prageeth here, Victor, Sustainability Manager. I'm quite interested. I've also just been having a look through the report, the original, the first draft from the SPC. And one of the headline points that was missing for me in electricity and energy, which I've touched on already, is the whole demand side part of the energy sector. And I think here is the real key area where we need to start highlighting it. I think the key recommendation that currently exists in the draft is related to the adoption of kind of just it's related to that 100% renewable energy goal. But the whole idea that as we move towards 100% electricity network and we move towards a highly electrified network, we need to enable a rapid uptake of demand side management, initially through smart EV charging and then over time to other appliances as well, right? Enabling that entire digitally driven energy infrastructure. And Robin has great words around this, so I can also let her pipe in from here. But I think this is a key element that we should communicate as well, because this then also ties into a few of the other avenues, right? The building sector, it ties into the equity sector. And I think it's in this energy line is where the bulk of that write-up would sit.
Yes, I think that it does appear in multiple places, Prageeth, and I think that the transformation, I mentioned technology, and implicit in that is the demand side, but then the climate change imperative, and of course, Commerce Commission, the Part 4 and the Electricity Commission's authority's statutory objective don't explicitly mention an emissions reduction profile at all. And so with, we're not going to rewrite their statutory objective, but you're making a very strong point, and it would appear here it's about the barriers, that the regulation is outdated for where we are today in 2021, where we want to go by 2030 and then 2050. So.
Yeah, without question. And the current regulation basically asks us to just build more poles and wires, which, as we kind of already know, will cost us a significant amount of money, which is going to then pump up electricity prices. So yeah, it's just that misalignment of, as you very rightly said.
And it bumps up against affordability and which is and a just transitions.
Yeah, that's right. I would just add that I think sort of the bridge between what you've both said, Toby and Prageeth, is that, as you mentioned, Toby, we know that demand for electricity is going to increase quite a lot and quite quickly. And to your point, Pradeep, it's 21st century technologies that are going to get us there affordably. But we know that these technologies behave quite differently to the technologies for which our market was designed, which was designed around the imperative to optimize value within each different value stack. But when you think about these digitally enabled demand response technologies, like what Pradeep was talking about, they cut across traditional market boundaries to, add new consumer value and to unlock new efficiencies. So it's just about checking in, having that conscious regulatory pivot to say, is the way that our market is being regulated, is that designed for the technologies and the innovations that are really going to get us here the most affordably? And and to deliver those existing objectives, for the EA of competition, affordability and reliability in an electrified future and in a more renewable future, that's going to require different solutions.
Yeah.
So, yeah. But I agree with everything you've both said.
So the speakers thus far are in violent agreement on this. So that's good in terms of tidying up the writing, Kate. Is there anyone else on the call would like to add anything back to process heat or in the energy sector? We are going to talk specifically about 2 alternative fuels in a moment. Before we turn to that, anyone else to say, go harder or don't go so hard on any of these things? No one, for example, has commented on making the 100% renewable electricity objective aspirational. Got nothing on that? Everyone good?
Maybe a piece on process heat is the fact that one of the leverages to enable process heat decarbonisation is also a reduction in electricity cost as well. So that also then intertwines into that first point.
Okay.
Olaf here, more questions than actual suggestions, but there's 2 things that are sort of, when I read the Climate Change Commission's advice, there's a lot is being made about, the uncertainty surrounding TY. Does SPC have any views on this at all? I mean, is there a recommendation to government to tell TY to make up their mind, for example? Because that seems to be a real barrier, right? There's a lot of uncertainty around it. Does anybody have a view on that? Because I don't, but
I would be nervous advocating that SPC form such a specific view.
Right.
There are a lot of parties on that. I think that the way you would frame that is if the government agencies had a pan-energy strategy, it would be easier for everyone to see where these, including Rio, it would be easier to see where the direction of travel is going. And
right.
Certainty would be one of them, but I'm not sure that it's a credible place to be actually saying,
yep.
Put the heat on Rio. Now, I've got no axe to grind. I don't have a horse in this race, by the way, Olaf. So
no, neither. But it appears a real barrier, right? This uncertainty.
Yeah. I was just going to support what you said there, Toby. Is that Olaf? We haven't expressed a firm view on this in the past, simply because, as Toby said, there are many parties to that conversation, and no one amongst the membership is amongst that grouping. The one view we would possibly express that is related, as Toby has said, is certainty and clarity on at least the assumptions the government is building into its forward path would be welcome, so that we can understand what's built in and what's left out, and therefore have transparency around the conversation in the future pathway.
Yeah, no, that's good. Thank you for that.
Thank you, Olaf. Now, Renee, you want to say something?
Yes, please. Thanks, Toby. Hi, so I'm Renee from DB. Just wanted to ask about the point that you've made on underwriting the costs for the process heat transition. I was wondering if you're able to quantify that, just so that the government can actually see the scale of the costs that they would need to meet, but also then understand that if they don't help in some way for businesses, then they can then understand what businesses will be faced with. So, yeah.
No, it's okay. No, So around the underwriting piece, I guess it's a little harder because we don't know the delta. I mean, I have a feel for what's going to sell a business case for an energy cost, but that delta piece is a little harder. But what we have done is we've pretty much taken the GIDI allowance, shall we say, which was about sort of 40% of funding. We know the total megawatts that need to be converted across. We've got that information in-house. So we've essentially taken that and a dollars per megawatt to convert and said, this is how many $1 billion you need to provide to industry. If you'd like to provide 40% of that funding, it's about 2.4 billion was the number I have in my mind. So we've asked for that, and this won't be the first time we've asked for that number. That also appeared in the briefing document to government a while ago.
Thanks, Jeff. I also had another question, which I also put in the chat, but it was around you'd done the study for the South Island process heat, and I was wondering if that was going to be expanded to the North Island. I noticed that in another workshop that we had, some businesses were concerned about the ability to report on their emissions, and I was wondering, my thoughts were that if you'd expanded the study to create a whole of New Zealand-wide understanding about process heat, then that would also hopefully meet the concerns of businesses having to report on their emissions, because that study would then actually already give to government that the scale that's required.
Yeah, I apologise. I replied to Kate instead of replying to everybody when you asked that question. So look, that's ongoing. So that's part of, for everyone else, it's ECA and Transpower who are on the call are parts supporting the work that we are leading with EDBs. And so it's really looking at each EDB and figuring out what end users are saying about when they're going to convert, what they're going to convert to, and that gives us a feel for how big the supply industry has to be in that region. And this all came from some industries, say dairy plants and wood plants and meat plants going and talking to the lines company and saying, oh, we'd like an extra 20 megawatts, please, or MVA, and the local lines company going, yeah, that's where the conversation went. So we're trying to build that up. Renee, at the moment, we've started at the bottom of the south because there's a lot of push in that part of the world, given the TY question and I guess conversation. So we're currently floating around the lower North Island, upper South Island, and we're working our way forward. That information is in the regional ECA's regional heat database, and as it gets completed, it gets uploaded into that area, and it's supposed to give a real feel for what the forward load is going to be on a kind of a per year basis. So you know, if you're a wood provider, oh cool, I'm going to have demand for X amount of wood in the future. Electricity wise, the local EDB is supposed to be able to say, I know how much where I'm going to have to move my electricity to, and help with those asset management plans. So that's coming, but again, this really has to be part of a wider strategy, because we're only really looking at kind of the fuels that businesses know are in front of them, rather than the gas option that we've spoken about today as an example.
Yep, no, that's key. Yeah, thank you for that. I also thought it would be part of that energy strategy, because obviously you have to know the scale of change you have to address. So yeah, good to see that that's also being continued.
Cool. Thanks, Renee.
Renee, I'm going to now go on to the last two slides. Not controversial at all, and 15 minutes should do it. At the moment, the proposal recommends greater emphasis on the potential of that should be green hydrogen as a low carbon fuel in the ERP, in particular incentivisation of measures to encourage research and innovation to explore hydrogen's potential. So green hydrogen has potential in a number of ways in New Zealand. It could be through transport, it could be through security of supply in the electricity system, it could be to produce green ammonia and green urea, it could be used for synfuels. This doesn't guess what the answer is. The way this recommendation is that if you take fossil fuels out of the system, then what's going to replace it? Is there a role for hydrogen? And some people have a very clear view as to what the answer is that, and it's not all one-way traffic. But we're saying that the government really needs to give some some clarity around this. And we mentioned the two uses of hydrogen there. So we want to know whether you're happy with that as a way of addressing the fact that green hydrogen's not necessarily going to go away. And here is the headline recommendation from the bioeconomy. And similarly, it talks about a strategy for a thriving climate resilient bioeconomy. But of course, that would sit in the context of the broader energy strategy. And there you see at number 2, support the development of biomass supply chains. And number 3, undertake a program to identify solutions to supply the North Island gas network with renewable gases. So those 2 suggestions, they're not quantified. As they stand, they could be a bit arm wavy. The bioeconomy, as Jeff has already said, is there are some specific places we can go in terms of quantifying ambitious targets and a sense of urgency. But can I just open the floor to say, are you comfortable with the way those recommendations are framed for looking at green hydrogen and bioeconomy?
Can I just say, Toby, that we would really welcome any more concrete suggestions around how the potential of hydrogen could be explored, because I think what we've tried to do in this section is draw together strands of hydrogen narrative that we've had in other contexts. For example, our Climate Change Commission submission. So we had quite heavy emphasis on it in the transport part of our commission submission, particularly in the freight piece. And then we talked a bit about it in the context of research, science and innovation, including in the session earlier today as well. But as Toby said, I love your phrase there, Toby, it could be a bit arm wavy. So to the extent that we can actually bring that home and make that a really kind of tangible and concrete proposal, we would really welcome input from you as to how that would be shaped.
Kia ora, this is Prageet here. I think I'll also just open up for Robin to pipe in as well, because she mentioned this at the very start of the transition of gases. This is currently one of the limitations that's preventing us from going forward. You know, I mean, as an engineer on the ground, we've done quite a lot of work already, understanding how much it would cost, what's required, what do we need to do, and can we go? And the answer generally is yes. There's a particular price tag. I take this to board and say, sign behind the line, and I'll go take $8 million and start getting that infrastructure set up. But then they will say, well, are we really sure that the gas lines are going to be there in 10 years' time? And am I risking, you know, our shareholder value by putting investment into technologies that will then be made redundant in a short period of time? So I think we just need quite a bit of clarity from the government to say, where are we going? So we can then make the adequate investments.
Yeah, and I would just add to that, it's not about, you know, picking winners amongst different green fuels. It's just to Prageet's point, ensuring that actually policy choices aren't made before a strategy is put in place, which does consider, you know, the impact of those choices and sending signals to investors. And that uncertainty could be holding back that investment in green fuels.
Okay, I have nothing else. I mean, well, these are the core. I mean, they're big. They're big, but there's not many of them, and we're getting some positive reinforcement for them, some clarity over some of the nuances, and appreciate Prageet and Robin's inputs into it. We're really in the hands of the audience now, because that's what the recommendations look like, and you know, they're big recommendations. They're important recommendations. It just seems absolute no-brainer that you would try and get some sort of coordination that fitted with government policy, so that people would just see how they're thinking and how policy might evolve. But I said I was going to say no more, didn't I? There we are. Anything more from you, Jeff?
Oh, no. Yeah, I guess Robin, you made a point before around not picking winners, and I agree we don't want to pick any winners, but I think there's going to come a point where we're probably going to have to pick some non-winners, i.e. those that are probably non-starters. So yeah, the guess one for me is challenging around the time frame piece that I talked about earlier on. And so I think collectively we've been asking for an energy strategy for 3 years now. If it's going to take 3 more years, then it's almost a done deal, and it's not probably worth pursuing some of these things for the I guess the process heat piece, which is part of the reason why we're here today.
Okay, back to you.
Thanks, Toby. I see Belinda's just put in the chat. Hi, Belinda, how are you? That MB has a hydrogen strategy for New Zealand that consists of 2 parts, the hydrogen vision published in 2019 and a hydrogen roadmap, which is under development. Very well observed, and thank you for the reminder there, Belinda. So I suppose anything in the spirit of whatever we add or propose in this response on the ERP being additive, as Toby has said, whatever we are proposing would build on that work that's already been done or is being done. So if there are no further questions, comments, or final observations, we can wind up there and give everybody a few minutes of their afternoon back. Thank you all very much once again. And I see Robin's just added something into the chat. Thank you, Robin. We'll take that away. Thank you for joining. I know times are busy and everybody is jumping from Zoom to Zoom. So thanks for making this a priority. We really appreciate your engagement, and it's great to hear your feedback that we're broadly on the right track with some of this stuff, and we'll build your comments into our next iteration of the submission. We had sought written feedback on the draft today. Please send us any written thoughts that you might have, or if you would like to have the chance to discuss with us either one-on-one or in a small group over the next few days, we'll absolutely make ourselves available for those discussions as well. So Olaf, I see you've just come off mute. Have you got something to add, or?
Oh, no, it was by accident. Sorry.
Okay, no, that's fine. That's fine.
I'll shut up.
Provide the opportunity if it was sought. So thanks to you all, and wishing you a wonderful afternoon and evening, and we'll be in touch with another draft next week. Thank you.
Thanks, Kate.
Right, thank you. Thanks, Kate. Thanks, Toby. Thanks, Jeff.
Good day.
Thanks.